For more than 2,000 years now, the story of Atlantis has existed in space somewhere between myth and memory. Most historians dismiss it as allegory, calling it a philosophical thought experiment invented by Plato to warn us about pride and societal collapse. But I would argue that it was those conclusions which were made up rather than Plato's story. In recent years, archaeology has been uncovering civilizations that are far, far older than what they previously thought possible. At the same time, scientists are beginning to ask some important fundamental questions. Mainstream scientists are starting to wonder if consciousness is really generated by the brain or if it might originate somewhere else. Is it possible that consciousness is primary? In this episode of The New Paranormal, we're exploring two questions which almost never come up in the same conversation. First, we're going to look at the idea of consciousness being fundamental to reality. Second, we're going to take a look at some of the evidence for the existence of Atlantis. I know that some of you are probably thinking that it sounds like I've lost my marbles, but if you'll bear with me, I promise I'll make a very flimsy and mildly interesting connection between the two subjects. For 100 years, science has been built on a framework called materialism, sometimes referred to as physicalism. According to this model, the universe is made of matter and energy and nothing else. Consciousness emerges from complex neural activity. When the brain dies, awareness ends, and there's an objective reality which exists independently of any observations. Things will continue to happen in the universe whether you're there to see them or not. Now, to be fair, this worldview has been successful in certain ways. It has given us modern medicine, large-scale industrial production, telecommunications, and in a limited sense, it has even given us space exploration. But materialism has some shortcomings which limit its usefulness. After several hundred years, materialism still struggles to find a way of explaining subjective experience. Modern science can measure electrical activity in the brain, and it can map chemical reactions. But none of that will explain why experience feels like something from the inside. Why do we think of the color red as being vivid or vibrant? Why do some pieces of music move us emotionally? For that matter, why does awareness exist at all? In 1995, a physicist named David Chalmers coined the term the hard problem of consciousness. It refers to the explanatory gap, which describes the inability of science to understand how physical brain states could be producing subjective phenomenal experiences. 30 years later, and mainstream science isn't any closer to solving that puzzle. Recently, however, some truly brilliant scientists, such as the Italian physicist Federico Faggin, have rediscovered what ancient cultures and shamanic traditions have known all along, that matter and energy emerge from consciousness, not the other way around. Federico Faggin does an excellent job of explaining all this in a theory which he calls quantum information panpsychism, and slowly but surely mainstream scientists are starting to catch on. When we look at the universe through this lens, many unanswered questions seem to sort themselves out. The hard problem of consciousness no longer exists. Paranormal phenomenon simply become normal phenomenon in a framework that doesn't ignore them. I believe we will see an explosion of new research and discoveries in the field of theoretical physics. It might take us a little while to get there, but we are already headed in the right direction. In the 20th century, quantum mechanics introduced what seemed like a deeply counterintuitive reality. At subatomic scales, particles do not seem to behave like solid objects. They exist in what scientists refer to as a probability state until they are measured. Different interpretations have attempted to explain this. Some of them cling to old-fashioned materialist perspectives, while others have tried to suggest that the very act of observation somehow plays an active part in determining the physical universe. This does not prove that consciousness creates reality, but it does reopen questions about the relationship between mind and matter. As more and more philosophers, neuroscientists, and physicists begin to consider models of reality in which consciousness is fundamental rather than emergent, we will be able to revisit old questions and find more complete answers. In these types of models, the brain functions kind of like a filter or a receiver, but consciousness is not actually being produced by the brain, and awareness actually exists independently of biological systems. These types of models don't change anything that we already know, and they are big enough to include space for things like remote viewing, telepathy, reincarnation, and clairvoyance. That means that clairvoyants might really be able to access some source of unseen knowledge. And if that's true, then Edgar Cayce may have been spot on about Atlantis. But I'm getting ahead of myself now, so let's put a pin in that idea and we'll get back to Edgar Cayce in a few minutes. Okay, so if consciousness is primary, and if awareness is not confined to neural tissues, then the boundaries of memory, perception, and information might be much, much broader than what we have assumed. Our primary historical source for Atlantis comes to us from the ancient Greek philosopher Plato. In his dialogues, Timaeus and Critias, which were both written in the 4th century BCE, Plato describes Atlantis as a powerful maritime civilization that existed more than 9,000 years before Plato's own time. According to Plato, Atlantis was located beyond the Pillars of Hercules, which we refer to today as the Strait of Gibraltar, separating the Mediterranean Sea from the Atlantic Ocean. Atlantis had advanced engineering, canal systems, and a complex political structure, and all of it was destroyed in a single day by a catastrophe. For centuries, historians have dismissed this as allegory, saying that it was an invention of Plato's imagination so that he could tell us a narrative about social decay. However, Plato himself presented the story as historical, saying that it had been passed down from Egyptian priests to the Greek lawmaker Solon. Plato, by the way, quite famously hated creative or fictional writing, so it seems unlikely that he would have made up his account of Atlantis. Recently, the story has gained support for its historical accuracy when a team of archaeologists discovered ancient ruins submerged off the coast of Cadiz, Spain, right where Plato had located Atlantis. The site is still being excavated, but the team doing the archaeological work has said that they are very confident that this is in fact Plato's lost kingdom of Atlantis. The city of Cadiz sits just beyond the Strait of Gibraltar along the southwestern coast of Spain, which is where Plato tells us the kingdom of Atlantis was located. This region would have been directly affected by global rise in sea level caused by melting glaciers at the end of the last ice age around 12,000 years ago. When this happened, entire coastal plains disappeared beneath the ocean. Satellite imagery and sonar surveys have revealed geometric formations beneath the waves off the coast of Cadiz, Spain. Researchers have identified these shapes as the remains of an ancient Ice Age civilization, which they believe to be the lost kingdom of Atlantis. In the early 20th century, the American clairvoyant Edgar Cayce delivered thousands of psychic readings while he was deep in a trance-like state. Many of those readings included detailed descriptions of Atlantis and its inhabitants. Cayce's visions revealed that Atlantis was a technologically advanced civilization, and that its destruction happened in 3 stages, the final one occurring in a single day, just as Plato had written about in his dialogues. He also described the survivors migrating to the Caribbean and the Yucatan Peninsula, the Basque region, and the Andes Mountains in South America. In what is today the country of Peru, they constructed impressive stone architecture using construction techniques which continue to baffle archaeologists and engineers. Many of these structures were later taken over by the Inca peoples, and some of the walls are still standing today. Cayce also predicted that a Hall of Records would be discovered underneath the paws of the Sphinx in Egypt, containing the accumulated knowledge and wisdom of Atlantis. Indeed, in 1991, Japanese archaeologists announced that they had discovered vast man-made chambers beneath the Sphinx's left front paw. They are still trying to obtain a permit to excavate the site, but the Egyptian government has so far refused to issue one. We know that ancient cultures had knowledge. The question is whether or not they recorded that knowledge, and if so, can we locate those records? Ever since it was fully excavated in the 1930s, the Sphinx in Egypt has been a great source of mystery. In the 1990s, seismic surveys conducted around the Sphinx detected subterranean cavities. Mainstream Egyptologists would like to deny their existence. Edgar Cayce predicted their discovery more than 70 years ago and said they were the Atlantean Hall of Records, but we won't know for sure until we can get inside and have a look around. If consciousness is fundamental rather than emergent, then memory is not limited to individual brain. Some philosophers believe that information could be embedded in a deeper structure of reality. This theoretical conception opens a provocative possibility. Myths are not inventions, but fragments of cognition. Not literal transcripts, but the echoes of real events. When sea levels rise and civilizations vanish, it becomes challenging to verify their history. Oral traditions can keep some records, but it is a delicate medium for storing information long term. It is prone to distortions and misrepresentations. Atlantis is a perfect example of that process. The information is there, but it gets harder and harder to read as time goes by. At present, there isn't much proof that Atlantis existed the way Plato described it. The underwater structures near Cayce don't have any signs or labels to identify them as Atlantis, so skeptics will never believe it's Atlantis. They don't want to believe that's where it is, and so they never will. Edgar Cayce's description of the Hall of Records beneath the Sphinx still needs to be verified. It could be done if the Egyptian government would ever issue a permit to excavate the site. Until then, all we can do is focus our attention in other directions. Science is focusing its attention on a more complete understanding of reality. The misinterpretations of the archaeological record are being re-examined and corrections are being made. We are finding new ways to answer old questions which classical science appears to have gotten wrong. Human curiosity continues to motivate investigations. We won't ever find any evidence that Atlantis didn't exist, but if we're persistent and focused, we just might find proof that it did. Further investigations might mean a new understanding of how consciousness perceives and stores information. It is an unknown path, but it leads somewhere, and I can't wait to find out where. Okay, that's where we'll leave it for today. As I promised, I have delivered a flimsy connection between consciousness and the search for Atlantis. I hope you enjoyed this episode of The New Paranormal, because in future episodes we will continue to explore topics like these. Until then, remember that I love you, and stay furious. All power to the people.